Hello, and welcome back to US History and Elections. We are just about a month away from the US presidential election now, and in this video, I'm going to be having a deep dive into the Electoral College. I'm going to be placing all the 241 electoral votes up for grabs, and I'm going to be placing them into likely, lean, and tilt categories for the Republicans and the Democratic candidates. Now, I'm then going to be putting every single state. I'm not going to be leaving toss-ups, even though I do have currently 3 toss-ups on my electoral map, and I'm going to be telling you who the favourite is on the 9th of October. Now, as you can see, I've left in quite a lot of empty states, ones that realistically are not competitive unless there's a unforeseen huge electoral landslide for either the Democrats or the Republicans, being Trump and Kamala Harris. So we're going to be filling in the likely Republican states first of all. This is Iowa, Ohio. These states realistically are not going to be competitive. Alaska, Maine second, I'm happy to put into that category now as well, alongside Florida and Texas. Now, Alaska, Iowa, Ohio realistically are not competitive at all. Of course, you have some statewide races, all the Iowa House races up in Congress. That's going to be fairly competitive for a couple of those. Ohio, of course, the Senate race is going to be competitive, but at a statewide level, and Alaska is likely just because of the way that they do their votes. They do um, a different type of electoral system over in Alaska. So that's going to be competitive, but at the presidential level, not so much. Texas and Florida, there's been a lot of talk. Florida is clearly trending red. There's a lot of Republicans moving in. The Democrats have seen a huge collapse in their voter registrations, and I do not see anything different for that in the presidential election. Texas is slowly trending blue, but this election cycle and probably the next election cycle, there's not going to be a serious threat for the Republicans losing it as a huge stronghold for their electoral college plans. And Maine second, of course, I remember in 2020, that was one of the only districts I got wrong, along with Georgia. Maine second has clearly stayed in the Trump column. It's got a lot of the base that he attracts very strongly, and I think it's going to be going by quite a comfortable margin in favour of Trump again. Now we're going to be moving over to the likely Democratic states. Again, most of these are not going to be surprises. Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico, Minnesota, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Nebraska's second is going into that category. Now, the ones that really don't stand out that much are New Hampshire, Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico. These races are always going to be close, but in this presidential election, there is no signs that any of those 4 states are trending in the direction of Trump. Maybe when Biden was in the race, he had a chance in maybe Minnesota, maybe New Mexico, maybe New Hampshire, but those states now with Kamala Harris a much more popular presidential candidate is really not going to be seeing much of a risk of losing those. However, Minnesota and Virginia have always been put into the a lot closer category. Whilst they are Democrat uh, holds and have been Democratic, Minnesota for a long, long time, and Virginia more recently has trended Democratic. There is no serious threat that Kamala Harris is going to be losing these. There's no polling evidence, and Tim Walz, as a Minnesota pick, has all but shored that up to be a Democratic stronghold for the 2024 election. And this, as you can see, leaves us with a good field. I just want to quickly touch on Nebraska second. All the polling out of there is showing near to a double-digit lead in Nebraska second. The incumbent Republican congressman for Nebraska second, Don Bacon, is also behind in polls, and he had always outperformed the presidential candidate in Nebraska second in 2020. He outperformed Joe Biden in that state, and he managed to hold on to his seat. But I do not see that happening in 2024. The polling, the way that Democrats are picking up new voters, more suburban voters, more white educated voters, that is exactly the demographics of Nebraska second, and it's just going to trend like Maine second. The base or the new base of the Democratic Party is going to build on places like Nebraska's second congressional district. Now we're going to be moving on to the lean states. Now these are states that I would say are still competitive, but at the moment they are, more solidly in a candidate's camp than the other. For the Republicans, I'm only happy to put 2 states in there at the moment. That would be Georgia along with Arizona. Now, these are 2 Sunbelt states. Georgia, of course, Joe Biden won extremely narrowly by about 13,000 votes in 2020, and there was a whole continuing whole argument over the way that the electoral votes were certified and whether there was any unforeseen and suspicious circumstances surrounding that. Of course, nothing really happened. Even the state's Republicans Party strongly opposed all of that. However, Georgia, got very in the Senate runoffs as well. It trended for both the Democrats to narrowly win in the January 6th runoffs, the other thing that happened on that day. But the polling has been almost certainly in Trump's favor. You've seen the odd poll that has had Kamala Harris with a 1 or 2 point lead or a tie, but a vast majority of polls have showed that Georgia is in favor of Trump this time around. And the same thing with Arizona, which is a lot more interesting. Of course, Arizona was the second closest state. Again, it was the very, very small margin. I do believe it was about 19,000 votes. It was maybe a bit more than that, but it was the second closest state in the country. And again, a real surprise considering Arizona and Georgia, two Sunbelt states, have typically been very conservative states. But like I said, the trend towards the Democratic Party, those sort of voters, they had started to turn out in the Phoenix suburbs, in the Atlanta suburbs. That is where you start seeing a little bit of a shift. Of course, there's a lot of Hispanic voters in Arizona. One of the reasons why it is looking more likely that Trump is going to win there is because he has gained even more ground in the Hispanic vote, an area which he had a key weakness in back in 2016, but has seriously built on that over the last 8 years. And it's looking like the border is going to be a big issue in Arizona. All the while, they're going to probably vote for Ruben Gallego for their Senate race. Carrie Lake is running again for Senate, and she's not looking running again for Senate. She ran for governor back in 2022, but another statewide race which looks like she is doing extremely poorly and way worse than she did in 2022. But these are the two leading Republican states I'm happy to put at the moment, and we'll go over to the Democratic side, and it's two of the Rust Belt states that Hillary Clinton lost fatefully in 2016, Wisconsin and Michigan. Now, I always go on about how Wisconsin is very, very difficult to call. There's many reasons for that. It's because the state is one of the most perfectly balanced states between Democrats, Republicans, and independents, and even that independent split, the balance between lean Republican independents and lean Democrats independents is very, very closely balanced. There's a lot of areas in the state that balance each other out. So the Madison, Milwaukee area in the southeast is going to be a lot more Democratic than the northern areas of Wisconsin, which is a lot more rural. And the polling data tends to be the most inaccurate in Wisconsin than it usually is. I remember Joe Biden had quite a strong lead in election day, about a 5 or 6 point lead in Wisconsin, and he only won it by about 1%, which was quite probably the biggest shock to me, outside of maybe Georgia going for the Democrats in 2020. But this is what I mean. The Democratic polling at the moment suggests that Wisconsin has a lead of about 1 or 2 points. However, we've seen in the last week that the polling in a lot of the battleground states has started to got a lot more competitive. In Georgia, there's not really been much of a massive lead for either candidate, which keeps this election extremely competitive. It is literally balancing on a needle at the moment. If anyone tells you that they are 100% certain one candidate is going to win, they are lying, or they are gaslighting you into thinking that one candidate has a really strong chance, because at the moment it's going to be decided in all these states by less than 3 points, if we're being real. In Georgia, in Michigan, no matter how well Kamala Harris is doing in Michigan, a lot of the polls are saying that she is leading by a healthy lead, just at the point of the margin of error. So 2 to 4 points usually is the average lead you're seeing in Michigan. But again, like I said, there's been a tightening of the polls in the last week, and this election is going to get a lot more competitive. And this leaves us with 3 states, and these 3 states, maybe not Nevada because it's only got 6 electoral votes, but these 3 states are going to be definitively defining this election. Now, at the moment, these are pretty much all toss-ups. Anything could happen between now and the end of the month, and then the 5 days after the end of the month when we finally have election day. But a lot of states have already started early voting. Early voting polling stations have opened. There's a lot of things that could happen between election day. Of course, in the news at the moment, later on today, there's going to be a huge, probably Category 4 hurricane that's going to smash into the west coast of Florida and affect millions, if not tens of millions, in the Florida area. So everyone, I hope, stays really safe there. But there's a lot of stuff that's going to be affecting the election in the Middle East. There's escalation. So these are all very unfinished uh, factors at the moment that could play into people's votes who have not voted. Only a small percentage have got their early mail-in ballot or have gone to an early voting polling station. However, at the moment, I'm going to give my reasons why I believe all three states are tilt to the Democrat. If I was to toss a coin, I still think it would be pretty split between who wins all these states. I'd say Nevada is probably the closest to going in the Democrats, mainly based on historical trends. However, Pennsylvania is a coin toss, the same with North Carolina, but I'm going to explain my reasons, and it's pretty much linked to the Senate races. I do believe that is how. And some of the more local races, even though there's going to be a lot of ticket splitting in some of these states, I think it's going to be an extremely close election. Now, Nevada, of course, is the state that always seems just out of reach of the Republicans by about 1 or 2 points. Hillary won it fairly comfortably back in 2016. But again, the unions in general being a lot more hesitant to support the Democratic candidate this time round, based on a lot of the economic data and the questionable support over unions. The Teamsters Union, of course, and of course, the food industry is massive in Las Vegas and southeastern Nevada. It's going to be really interesting to see. And the Hispanic vote, like I mentioned in Arizona, is going to be a huge, huge play in which way Nevada votes. But I think there's just enough help, as well as Jackie Rosen doing extremely well in all the Senate polling at the moment up against Sam Brown in the Senate race. That's not going to be a competitive Senate race. Probably the one that, out of all the competitive Senate races, that's the one that's going to be the most safe for the Democrats. I would be highly, highly surprised if Sam Brown actually runs within the margin of error when it comes to election day. So that's why Nevada I am putting in the tilt column at the moment. But like I said, there's many reasons why the suggestions of the historical trends may show that the Republicans still have a chance there. And then that leaves Pennsylvania and North Carolina. Pennsylvania, of course, there's a Senate race. Bob Casey is running against Dave McCormick, and that's going to be pretty close. That's going to be a competitive Senate race, but all the polls at the moment do show that Bob Casey, the incumbent, does have a lead. That's going to help some of the Democratic voters. But again, we're going to be looking at specific counties, like this county right up here that borders Lake Erie, Erie County. You can see where it gets its name. That has always seemed to be the bellwether county of a bellwether state like Pennsylvania. It voted for Donald Trump narrowly 2016, went back to the Democrats with Joe Biden narrowly in 2020. And I think realistically on election day, you wouldn't be watching places like Erie County see how the votes are counting up on the election night, even though Pennsylvania does take a little longer to come through with all of its early and mail-in ballots. However, I think Pennsylvania is slightly trending Democrat at the moment, but we've seen a lot of polls that some will say Harris +3, some will take Trump +3. Again, the average is literally negligible because of the margin of error in all these polls. So Pennsylvania is pretty much coin toss at the moment, but I would say the Democrats, if I was to choose one side, Democrats and Kamala Harris would be favourites at the moment. And same with North Carolina. Of course, North Carolina has been pretty much the Democrats' version of Nevada. They'd always been really close in the presidential election. Biden lost it by about 1.5 points. Obama did win it back in 2008, lost it in 2012 during his re-election bid. The only state, as alongside Iowa and Indiana, I do believe, that he lost, and the only one that still remains a competitive state in 2024. But the big thing in this race is not a Senate race, but a governor race. You have Mark Robinson, the Republican candidate, who was always a weak candidate, and we heard stuff about him at the start of the year. And when I was thinking this, I was like, oh, Democratic campaign must have way more on him. And in the last month or so, his poll numbers have tanked. In a lean red state, he is double digit underwater in even the best polls for him. He's going to be losing to Stein by about 10 to 15 points on election day. It's going to be a huge blowout for a Democratic governor in a otherwise pretty competitive state. And there's going to be a lot of ticket splitters. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to vote for Trump, but are either going to pass on the governor race or simply vote for Josh Stein in that governor's race. Sorry. And I think that's going to be a big part. Of course, you've seen the western half of North Carolina. Hurricane Helene did huge amounts of damage in the Asheville area. So we're talking about Appalachia, this side. Asheville is a Democratic area, but the surrounding areas are extremely rural, extremely mountainous, and much more the MAGA base that Trump has done so well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that affects people. I mean, the Trump campaign literally came out with a statement the other day saying they want to make sure that as many people in that area can vote. They clearly see this as an area that could be tipping the balance in favor of Kamala Harris in North Carolina. The polls, again, are negligible, but North Carolina is trending Democratic. It has shown that over the last few years, and it has been a heavily gerrymandered state as well. So it's going to be really interesting in 2024 for the presidential race, which I am slightly putting in the Democratic column. But again, this is a toss-up race at best. 2026, there's going to be a Senate race. The expiring governor, Roy Cooper, is likely going to throw his hat into the race for that. That's going to be a really interesting race to see how the Senate shapes up in 2026. But for 2024, I'm putting it just in the column of the Democrats. And with all these three tilt states, that gives the Democrats a fairly healthy electoral vote margin. But all you have to do is put Pennsylvania red, North Carolina red, only by about half a percentage point. Could flip, who knows? And the Republicans win, and Donald Trump is elected as the 47th president of the United States. However, that could happen. This could very well happen. We could have Kamala Harris as the 47th president. So thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. We're going to be doing a lot more videos in the run up to the election, and I hope to see you all again very soon.